Today we're going to be talking about the Great Depression. The onset of the Depression. Here's an overview. After the economic boom of the 20s, there was an economic depression in the 30s. The Depression awakened political leaders to the need for reform laws. Under FDR, the government was heavily involved with the economy. Now, what were the causes of the Depression? Here's an overview. There were many economic weaknesses that eventually led to the Depression. Wages lagged the crazy increase in production and then increased consumer debt. In turn, with that, led to many products that were made that consumers could not afford. Farmers also continued to face low crop prices, and they also left for cities, which made farmland really cheap. Both of these causes led to the rural economy going into shambles. A lot of investors also lost their savings by going into debt from getting loans to buy stocks. Stock market crash. His background: Hoover became president in 1928, and during his first 6 months in office, economic prosperity continued. However, prices of stocks slowly started to go down as time went on. The price drop in stocks panicked investors, and on October 29, 1929, otherwise known as Black Tuesday, on this day, thousands of investors sold their stock at a low price due to the panic that was rising. And then the prices of stocks continued to plummet through December. The Great Crash had four major repercussions. Billions of dollars in savings was lost. Businesses and people who took out loans to buy stocks went bankrupt. Many banks failed when a large number of depositors sought to withdraw all of their money at once, and people lost faith in the economy. And on that last point, for years after the crash, people actually preferred to save what money they had rather than invest it. Worldwide repercussions. Here's a background. During the Great War, U.S. economy had boomed, and U.S. industries produced a vast amount of quantities, especially in war materials. But the war also caused an imbalance in the world economy that would eventually lead to a worldwide depression, as the Germans and Allies were both deep in debt. By 1930, the major nations were economically intertwined, especially with the U.S., since their businesses and banks gave out loans to almost everybody. The U.S. was at the center of a loan web that intertwined Germany and the Allies. If the U.S. economy crashed, then Europe would go down with it. The U.S. Made the Depression way worse with the Hawley-Smoot tariff. U.S. raised the import taxes to protect U.S. industries. That led to Europe also increasing their import taxes, which led to a trade decrease by up to 50% between the nations involved. What was Hoover's response to the Depression? Hoover was president during the first 2 years of the Depression. He tried his best to stop the Great Depression, but it really didn't work. So what did he do? He cut taxes so consumers could spend more money. He increased government spending on public projects. He persuaded Congress to give federal loans to struggling banks, railroads, and insurance companies. He persuaded Congress to establish the Federal Farm Board to help farmers through tough times, and he temporarily halted payments of debts from Europe because the Depression was worldwide. However, Hoover's policies did not improve the economy, and many accused him of aiding businesses rather than the poor and unemployed. Hoover did not want to directly aid the poor, since he believed that citizens should be able to support themselves without government assistance. He believed in trickle-down economics, and he implemented this because he believed that pumping money to the economy would create a surplus that would eventually trickle down to the rest of society. He created the Reconstruction Finance Corporation in 1932, and this is a government corporation that provided federal relief to businesses, especially banks, and it was actually one of the successful parts of Hoover's response. The impact of the Depression. In 1932, 25% of the labor force was unemployed, which is 12 million people. For people still with jobs, they got paid a lot less. 5,000 banks closed, factory production decreased, and crop prices decreased even further. The Bonus Army. In 1932, 17,000 veterans from World War I marched across the country to D.C. to persuade the President and Congress to pay the bonuses that they were owed. They instead got threatened with federal troops. And Hooversville, these were encampments of homeless people during the Great Depression, and many of the homeless actually had to live in boxcars since they couldn't even afford to pay the lowest amount of rent. The impact of the Depression, Part 2. The flapper culture of women in the 20s shifted back again into traditional values in the 30s. Many women concentrated once again to the needs of their families. African Americans suffered the full force of the Great Depression. They were the first to be fired and the last to be hired. Native-born opposition to immigration continued on in the 30s, especially with the few job opportunities that were available. The Dust Bowl was a part of the Great Plains. A part of the Great Plains could not be farmed due to drought and unsustainable farming practices, and many of the former farmers affected had to travel and find work elsewhere.